My husband asked me to sign a prenuptial agreement 6 weeks before our wedding. He presented it as sensible financial planning. We were both professionals, both had assets, both understood the value of protecting what we'd built independently. He said it wasn't about trust. He said it was just practical. He'd had his solicitor draw it up, and all I needed to do was read it and sign. I read it. The agreement protected his property portfolio, 4 buy-to-let flats he'd inherited from his father, and ring-fenced his pension. It specified that in the event of divorce, neither party would make a claim on assets brought into the marriage. Clean, simple, symmetrical. Or so it appeared. What the agreement didn't mention, because neither party was required to disclose it, was the business I had been quietly building for 3 years in the evenings and on weekends while holding down a full-time job. I hadn't told Daniel about it, not because I was hiding it, I wasn't, but because I'd learnt early in our relationship that he had a way of absorbing things. Ideas I mentioned became his ideas. Projects I described became projects he had opinions on. I'd stopped sharing things in early draft form and started only telling him about finished things. It was just easier. The business wasn't finished yet. It was close, but not finished. I signed the prenup. My solicitor, yes, I had my own, I'm not naive, reviewed it and confirmed it was fair and symmetrical. She asked whether I had any assets to disclose. I told her about my savings, my flat which I was renting out, and my shares. I didn't mention the business because it had no value yet. It was just a company number and a website and 18 months of work. We got married in September. It was a beautiful day. I meant every word I said. 14 months later, I came home early from a work trip and found a woman I didn't recognise sitting at my kitchen table wearing Daniel's dressing gown. She didn't know he was married. That was the first thing she said. I told her I hadn't known either. Not really. I didn't cry. I remember being surprised by that. I stood in my own kitchen, looking at a stranger in my husband's dressing gown, and felt something settle in me, like cold water finding its level. Daniel arrived home 40 minutes later. He'd been at the gym, he said. Then he saw her face, and he stopped talking. I made tea. All 3 of us stood in the kitchen, while the kettle boiled and nobody said anything. She left. He tried to explain. I listened to all of it, he asked. The loneliness, the pressure, it didn't mean anything. And I nodded in the right places, and then I said I needed some time to think, and I went upstairs. I didn't think. I planned. The business had launched 4 months earlier. I had said nothing to Daniel because I'd wanted to see if it would work before I introduced it into our shared life. It had worked, better than I'd expected. The first quarter revenue had been just over £60,000. The second quarter was tracking at 90. I called my solicitor the following morning, not the one who'd reviewed the prenup, a different one, a family specialist. I told her what had happened and I asked her what I needed to know. She told me several things. The prenup was valid and enforceable. Daniel's property portfolio and pension were protected. So was my flat, my savings, my shares, and my business. The business I had built before we married, which had no value at signing, but now had a very great deal of value indeed, was mine. Entirely mine. The prenup he had asked me to sign had protected it perfectly. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I opened my laptop and looked at the third quarter projections. I didn't tell Daniel I'd spoken to a solicitor. I didn't tell him I was leaving. I went about the next 6 weeks the way I go about most things. Methodically, quietly, without drama. I separated our finances carefully. I documented everything that needed documenting. I arranged somewhere to live. I gave notice on the flat I'd been renting out so I could move back into it. I was scrupulously fair about shared possessions. I took what was mine and left what was his and split what was genuinely shared down the middle. The conversation where I told him it was over lasted about 12 minutes. He was shocked, which surprised me. He'd known for 6 weeks that things were different between us, but I suppose he'd assumed that meant he still had time to fix it. He didn't bring up the money for several days. When he did, he'd clearly been speaking to someone, a friend, or perhaps his own solicitor, because he came to the conversation with confidence that he was entitled to a share of the business. I let him finish. Then I explained, as calmly as I could, that the prenup he'd drafted and presented to me 6 weeks before our wedding protected all premarital assets from claims in the event of divorce. The business had been registered 2 years before we married. The work that built it had begun 3 years before we married. Under the terms of the agreement he had asked me to sign, it was entirely protected. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked how much it was worth. I told him. He didn't say anything after that. The divorce was finalised 11 months later. He kept his 4 flats and his pension. I kept my flat, my savings, my shares, and a business that by the time the papers were signed was generating just over £400,000 a year. I didn't set out to build it as a hedge against anything. I built it because I had an idea, and I worked hard and it grew. The prenup was his idea. The symmetry was accidental. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't grateful for both. I run the business full-time now. I have 6 employees and a waiting list, and a second product launching in the autumn. I am 34 years old, and I have never been less interested in what anyone else thinks I should be doing with my life. If someone asks you to sign something, read it carefully, then get your own solicitor to read it too. You might find it protects more than you expected. Has a situation ever turned out to work in your favour in a way you didn't plan? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more complete stories with no part 2s that never come, follow the page. New story every day.